All right.
Yeah. So good morning, Lisa.
Good morning, Eric.
Yeah. So thank you for joining us for your segment of the Recovery Act Artist Talk. Um, just want to start off just to kind of get our audience familiar with you as an artist and how you got started in your practice.
Oh, wow. I, th- I think it's pretty typical, really, that it's something that I've always done. Since I was very young, it was, my escape and therapy and exploration was always involved some type of making. Um, you know, uh, so I think, that is always that's one of the questions, like, well, where did this begin? I have no idea. Like, I have no idea why of it. Like, I don't know. I know my grandmother, we have frequent thunderstorms and we would lose power for hours, and her go-to was always coloring books. So that's what I always did with her when I was really tiny. And cousins, because we lived in a rural part of Louisiana when I was really young and on a family plot of land. And I had cousins who were there in their own house in the back. And um, that was our activity. We would do that. We would look at clouds and tell stories based upon, whatever images we could find in clouds. So, probably where it began was just with my family, just the way they were. I had relatives who could play music by ear, and so there's always this creative streak that seems to run. It seems to run through my family. I have so many family members who are different types of artists. My cousin Tyrone is an instructor and a jazz pianist in out of Atlanta, and I have cousins who are, also involved in different aspects of music and writing, et cetera, et cetera. So, yeah, I think that's where
Wow. So art runs in the family.
it does.
And
It does. My mother has toured, and she actually toured twice with her group, the New Orleans Black Chorale, and they did work in Mexico. They toured with over there to participate. They were invited to participate in a program with I think it was the Mexican Philharmonic or the Symphony. I can't remember which. So yeah, it does. Just runs in my family.
oh wow, wow. And at what point did you start to see this kind of develop in your life as an artist?
Um, when I was probably around 9 or 10, maybe a little older, my mother and my aunt, who's also she's a singer as well, and she used to be a backup singer back in the day in New Orleans, and she has three daughters, and two of them also gravitated toward art making, and they hired a local artist to be an instructor for us. So it was our parents who saw that we had an interest um, and fed that. I would say as an artist, I started off when I went to college. I started off as a real estate development major, and my mother put the kibosh on that. She said, "No." She's like, "You really love art, and I think that's what you should study." So then I got my undergrad in studio art. I got my master's in arts administration from the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. Actually, specifically arts administration and policy. Um, but it's something even during that, I wasn't born with a silver spoon. I wasn't in that situation where I could um, just do art 100% of the time, because we know that doesn't always pay the rent, and I'm not into not paying rent. Uh, so I know some people roll like that. I do not roll couch surfing. God bless. God bless the Basquiats out in the world who can live in a certain
Uh-huh.
um so I've always had jobs at the same time, and I
Okay.
produced art shows, and it's a love hate relationship with art. It always has been for me. So it's, you throw your hands up because you work so hard, and you do all of this work, and sometimes you don't get recognition, you don't get into shows, you don't get to display, and then it piles up, and then there's the poverty aspect of it. But
Yeah.
that is unusual, right? And there's some artists, and I can't remember this one gentleman's name. He's out of Los Angeles, and I think he's passed away at this point. And I remember reading something. I'm just tired of being poor, and he was in shows, and he was recognized, and he had, I would say, a high profile career in that way. But still, you know,
It's funny you mention that. There's a lot of artists that, their name, they receive like high recognition name wise, but they still still struggle for one reason or another. Either they're not paid what they're supposed to get paid, or everybody's just more of an admirer than, invested in the work,
we
monetary wise.
yeah, I mean,
So,
we admire and we think artists are wonderful, and I think that's something that's very, um, it's something that we see in this culture. Not every culture. Uh,
hmm
uh, you know, I think we created this myth in this culture that artists are supposed to be struggling and poor and crazy.
hmm
And I think for people who are artists themselves, if you don't fit that mold or that myth of who you should be as an artist, sometimes you question yourself, like maybe, and other people question you. But you
hmm
seem insane. You can't be an artist. You know.
Yeah, it's yeah, that's funny. I had that with like family. It's like, oh, they love and they support it, but I tell them about artists that's actually alive, that's my age, that's doing well, and they like, they making what? Because they just, everybody hear this stigma that broke starving artist, and it's like every artist is not starving, but some are. So it varies.
And I think yeah, and I don't think you have to be, or this idea that if you um, paint, then you need to. That's all you do. You're a painter.
hmm
Or if you decide to sculpt, that's all you do.
hmm
When and I think I did struggle with that early on because I've always been more attracted to expressing an idea in the way I thought it wanted to be expressed.
hmm
Um, and some ideas come into my head, and I think that, that is an installation. Some ideas come into my head, and that's a work on paper. That is a painting, or so it varies, like what I work in. Like right now, I'm actually stitching. I think it was Field Article 53. It's 53 or 63. I can't remember. But it's 40 acres and a mule is what we know it as. Um,
hmm
so I'm actually stitching that right now. So on pieces of cloth.
Oh
Um,
wow.
and also doing handmade paper, um, and then printing parts of the article on the handmade paper. So it's expressing itself that way.
Oh
Um,
wow.
so sometimes, it's a photograph, um,
hmm
and it's straight photography. I do that as well. I love film photography. Um, and then sometimes it's a chair that I manipulate. It depends on um, you know what I'm trying to express. And I feel like we got off track, and I can't even remember what you asked me.
It's fine. Actually, that's pretty good because I did want to get a little bit idea of other projects that you're working on and the materials in your process. So that kind of helped cover that aspect. What I wanted to know is if you could talk about your piece in the exhibition Recovery Act, Josephine and her cowboy husband. And if you could kind of tell us a little bit about your process in creating it and the story behind it.
Oh, why don't we start with story first?
Okay,
Because I think part of
let's
that
do that.
calling the process. Story. So I have this obsession with old photos. I love old photos and the story that they visually tell and trying to decode them also. I love that. And I also love um, old photos of Black people in this country because a lot of times growing up in history books and just in general, that's not something that I saw a lot of.
Mm, hmm.
Documenting our just existence.
Exactly.
And seeing photos of us existing at a time where a lot of the times we see the images and it's of us being tortured.
Hmm.
There's a lot of old Black and white photos of Black people who are lynched. There's a lot of old Black and white photos and when I say a lot of, I mean what I've always seen in popular media
Mm.
of Black people. When I'm
Exactly.
older photos, 1900, somewhere in the late 1800s or the early 1900s and 1920s. When I'm seeing these older photos, I'm seeing it of us protesting or of us, somehow being in a position where we're in danger or in jeopardy, but just these everyday photos of maybe us gardening, you know, hanging out on the porch, taking a walk, um, and also the ability of, I think a lot of our families may not have our histories as documented.
Exactly.
Having access to that type of technology was something that we didn't have many times. There's some of our families who do, right? I do have some family members and some pictures of older pictures of people in my family, but not to the extent I think. And I don't think it's just Black people. I think it's people who may not have means, whose lives don't get documented. We see a lot
Hmm.
of Vanderbilts and the Roosevelts, but the people who really like our individual stories of what we would consider to be ordinary people that really do make up the history of this country and the world in general, are not as documented. So it's one of the things I'm really obsessed about, and I love looking at. And I think for this particular piece, the seeds of it were planted. God, years ago, I was at an exhibition, going through an exhibition at the Oakland Museum of Art. What is it? The Oakland Museum of California Art? Is that the name of it?
Yeah, that's what they go by now.
Which I love that museum, and I think they do a fantastic job. So
Hmm.
I was on a school tour. I have two children, and I was on a school tour with my God, I think he was in second or third grade, so it's been a couple of years. And I remember going through the California exhibition. I don't know if you've ever been there to that.
Yes, I remember.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They're telling the history of California. And there's these pictures and these stories, and there's the West, the California, the myth of the old West that we have here in this state and out in the western regions of the United States, and they're telling these stories, and I'm like, where are we in that?
Hmm.
And so, I'm like, we had to have been there. There is no place. I mean, we put a flag in the North Pole. There is no place that we are not. Period.
Exactly.
And so as I started doing more and more research and hearing and seeing that at one point, I think it was maybe the late 1800s,
Hmm.
about 25% of the cowboys were of African descent. 25%.
Wow.
How often I mean, I don't know about you, but sometimes I've seen Westerns and a Black person pops up. I'm like, oh, wow, look at that.
Yeah, exactly.
Of course, there should be more. And so how we are so excluded from this myth um, our Western myth, and what is it, the pioneer myth? Like we were there too. We were there homesteading and having, loving relationships and raising children and planting gardens and uh, getting annoyed by our husbands, like just living ordinary lives. And so in doing that, I came upon a few photos, so more, that's 3 or 4, of us in that context. And one of them was of this woman. Um, the photo was labeled, I think it was Cowboy and his wife. And so as I did more digging, not only are we not there as Black people, or we're not
Mhm.
shown to be there, but especially, so 25% of cowboys, but let's talk about the women who were there too. So especially having any type of narrative, I think that's centered around a Black female existence, and not in a way where she is, you know, not say a homesteader. Usually if, we're talking about, especially if you think about photos or images that we see of women and Black women in this time, you're in the position of being a servant, which that did exist, but there's also, there's other narratives as well.
Exactly.
And so as I did more research, I found out that this cowboy's wife had a name, and her name was Josephine, and his name is George. So it wasn't just Cowboy and his wife. This was George and Josephine, and they have a last name, and I can't remember what it is right now. And so when I started doing this piece, I started this piece in March, when we started to go into shelter in place. And the green at the bottom is from a manipulated photo that I took years ago, and I used it for another series called Sacrifice Zones, and it was very abstract, and I think I'll maybe possibly too abstract to really communicate what I needed to communicate. But this was on a big board, and it started to peel off. And as it peeled off, I started to tear it off. And as I started to tear it
Oh,
off,
wow.
there are smaller pieces, and then reassemble them. And so a lot of this that is on this board really come from materials that I had on hand, because like I said, we're in shelter in place. This is the very beginning. So any stores that I possibly could have bought any materials from were closed. And I had these on hand. So this is layers and layers of soaked printed paper with glue and gesso that were applied into this board. And as it took a couple of months to complete this, so as we went along and the stores open, I was able to get access to some watercolor paper. So it began to take shape as this landscape.
Oh, wow.
This portrait of these two people in front of it. But if you really look, for me anyway, it really does look like, the green piece as the land, and then you see sky, and I can see mountains in that, which are
That
actually,
was, uh,
hmm?
yeah, that was my first interpretation of it. So if that was your intent, mission accomplished.
Yeah. And so, and here he is with his what do they call they have a name, woolly chaps, I think they're called, that he's wearing, and his gun, and his wife standing there, and in my mind, in front of really this large piece of land, that in my mind that they own, that they are homesteading on, uh, as a part of, them being a part of this mythology um, of the Old West, of the settling of the Old West, that they were there. And other pieces, and then, you know, we can't really see if we look at the sky. Those are also torn and cut pieces of paper out of a series of old Life magazine, which I think Life, you know, publications like Life magazine, I think informed uh, ordinary people of the country of this. This is what life looked like. These are the events in history that deserved to be put into printed paper and to be published, and we weren't a part of that as well. And so, you know, it has to also, the piece also has to deal with how we are excluded from that. But even being excluded from that, that still plays a part um, in us imagining our own mythologies. Um, so I included that as part of their sky because I think it is, for better or worse. A lot of the words, the texts that are in the piece are from moments in time that are long after these two people have probably have passed away. But they, you know, the idea of where and when we are in time is also something that in my mind I'm still trying to figure out. Um, so I, you know, part of this is in the Old West where they physically, I think, are situated, and then part of this is other periods of time. So.
Okay. So that is, thank you. That is amazing. Actually, I learned more about the piece now than I did before. So I gotta ask you another question. What does recovery mean to you as an artist?
I think for me, recovery is, um, you know, well, and it's hard for me to separate being an artist just from just in my everyday existence. And so I think in recovery right now in this moment, it is doing those things that we need to recover our history, to reclaim it, to, uh, to develop our own understanding of it. Um, that is apart from, you know, being told who we are,
Mm-hmm.
who we were, or where we're going. So recovering of our understanding of ourselves, recovering our own understanding of our power, and our divinity. There's so many definitions for me for recovery, but I think, especially in as it relates to this piece, it is about rediscovering uh, in
Our
who we
own stories. Mhm. Exactly. So one more. Actually, it's not a question. It is. Can you share with us your website, your Instagram? Where can we follow you to see more of your amazing work?
So my website is probably the best place. It's Leisel Whitlock. It's Leisel Whitlock, WHITLOCK.com. I think you can search me on Instagram. I am so bad at social media.
Yeah, I slowly catching up myself.
I know. I need to get better. I rarely post like you need to post. Like there's a rhythm to it. I'm like, oh, really?
Mhm. Yeah, it took me a while too.
Yeah, right? So I'm working on that. If anybody ever wants to give me tips, please feel free.
All right, I'll do that offline. I think I finally got the hang of it. All right, Lisa, thank you so much. That is so amazing. Thank you for giving us an insight into you and also your amazing work in the show. So, thank you very much.
Thank you for putting this show together. If anyone has not seen it, I have to say it is so well done.
All right, and also just to let everybody know, go to www.rootsartistregistry.com/recovery act. rootsartistregistry.com/recovery act. You can see Lisa's piece there and other works in the online exhibit. Thank you so much, Lisa.
All right, thank you.